So hello everyone, welcome to LevelUp IAS. I'm Swetank and this is going to be a small discussion on very essential topic of political science and international relation, and that is end of ideology. We'll also talk about the resurgence of ideology. This is a very important thing we are going to do here. As in I hope so that you must be aware of the very basic definition of ideology. If you're not, I'm here for that. Everyone, let's discuss it in a simple manner. Everyone have certain sets of ideas, certain sets of belief which are evolved over a period of time, maybe because of some of our inherent notion, our observation, the place where we live, the societal impact, the power dynamics around us. Everything plays a very vital role, and we have certain sets of ideas, belief sets which constrain our doing and misdoing. Now individual then make the society. Okay, the famous Platonic idea that the society is basically individual writ large. Okay, so state is individual writ large, so that's how it all works. So the state or the society's ideas or the whole consensus built concepts is basically which we define in a most generic sense ideology. Now in 1960s somewhere this is all happening after Second World War. Daniel Bell, scholar, he wrote a book. It's a very seminal book. It's the end of ideology, on the exhaustion of political ideas in the 50s, written by Daniel Bell. Now Bell wrote this book, and there's a very specific idea, reasoning behind writing this book, and let me explain you that thing. Bell said, and that is something even scholars and politicians say in the modern times, that the major ideologies which were acting in the first part of the 20th century, those were liberalism, Marxism, and a lot of people also said fascism. Okay, these three were there. After First World War, after the First and Second World War, we saw that a lot of people, at least in the Western world, which was led by United States of America, they reached an understanding that we have to follow the liberalism principle only. Since most of the topics which we are going to talk about are going from this perspective only, Daniel Bell specifically argued that in 1950s we have observed that whatever liberalism is trying to achieve, whatever Marxism or communism is trying to achieve, is ultimately the same thing, and that is overall welfare for individual people who are living in the society. So whether you are trying to achieve it from first as an state should do it, or you are trying to do individual an opportunity to do it, ultimately the overall betterment is the ultimate idea. In that circumstances, it is more important than the going from a specific ideology, but to use specific technology and specific techniques to achieve it. And so Daniel Bell said that the very need of ideology is not there. Okay, what Bell is saying? Bell is saying that need of ideology. Okay, just give you need of ideology isn't there. Okay, so that is something you have to keep in mind. Now what he said further? He said that it's the technical advancement, and you also need to understand that later part of 1950s is the period when the Soviets and the Americans have started the technical struggle, as in the Cold War ka wo wala phase when everyone was trying to make Sputnik 1 or a rocket. Okay, so that technical race, it hasn't yet evolved into what finally led to the Apollo 9 and subsequently Apollo rockets up to the moon, but the struggle has started. So that is where the whole idea is coming from. Now you also need to understand, and let me just tell you this thing, that if you want to make a plot of this on a timeline, okay, you can always say that we saw in the 20th century the rise of ideology, and a lot of scholars will say it will then fall. The highest peak point of when the ideology was making every decision for these scholars who are writing in support of end of ideology? They will say it was the period of 1939 when the Second World War started. And then they said that subsequently after 1945, the requirement started reducing, and in 1950 it was very much visible that you doesn't really matter that which side of ideology you are from. Fine. So this is an observation of Daniel Bell. This is also an observation which is supported by someone like S.M. Lipset. So he is also there. But subsequently scholars came in who said that if you move further down the line, the requirement of ideology again increased. Now, whether it went like this, that is, the whole importance of ideology in the society increased and then decreased and then again increased, or it was always there, it was consistently there, and it is us who don't recognize it many a time. That's the issue. Fine. So now come to this. Here, if you will see that end of ideology is written as a concept of end of ideology, which was basically understood as a new consensus has emerged, and everyone has realized that democracy and capitalism is the way forward. That is something propounded by Daniel Bell. Now, what you further need to understand is this idea here, and this is not something you have to note down. This will be attached to your handouts, and you can read it from there. Okay, and the link of a handout is, I think so, it will be below the video, so you can pick up. So Daniel Bell came up with a basic idea. Now, yeah, just give me a moment. Fine. Samuel Lipset, I told you, he specifically mentioned that the decline of ideology was a result of economic and social development. And from S.M. Lipset's this concept only, the very other concept, you might have also heard that very thing, that people said back in the day, in late 1990s, that let the China grow, and once the Chinese people would have got that capability, that financial standing, then they will themselves demand democracy from their government. Although that has not happened, but that is something which is based on Samuel Lipset's observation, that after a certain level of economic relief, people start moving toward individualism, and from there they will start asking for participation, stakeholdership, and that's where democracy comes into picture. Fine. So Samuel Lipset also said that yes, it seems like ideology is not that important. Okay. So two scholars you know, and that is all on one side you need to understand. But as I told you, there were a lot of scholars who said that no, nothing like this. Okay. There are a lot of scholars who said no, ideology is a very essential thing. It was there, it is there, it will be there. You cannot remove it. There is no way out of it. Okay. As long as people will be there, as long as they will have the capability to think, there will be certain ideas. There will be a general perception of ideas, and then there will be ideology. The most important among them were C. Wright Mill. Now, if you have read a bit of political science, you might have heard about C. Wright Mill as someone who has been again and again argued and standardized in a standardized manner about existence of a elite, a global elite who ultimately are running the society. He was when he argued this thing in 1950s first, he was talking about the American elite, but then idea was also accepted by almost all the countries who ever talked about liberalism or any this kind of thing. So over here you will see C. Wright Mill will argue what? As in sociologist, he said that end of ideology is a myth, and that has been perpetuated by a global elite. And what he says, why this has been perpetuated by global elite? Because otherwise people will be divided. As long as people will be hoping and expecting कि अब ideology की ज़रूरत नहीं है, there is no need of ideology, then people will look for technical improvement, and that's the place where elites can maintain their authority, keep themselves in the position of power. Fine. So that's an observation how C. Wright Mill explained it. Then Irwin Kristol Kristol is basically a journalist also, and he's a conservative intellectual over the period of time he became. And he said that, look, anyone who is saying that there is a phase of end of ideology, that person don't know how ideology works itself. And he is living in a cuckoo land. He is living in a place of illusion. And he believed that the decline of traditional ideologies like socialism and liberalism, that he said ho sakta hai, could have happened. He never said that always liberalism and communism and socialism will only exist. Something new will come. But there will be an ideology always, or at least not one, but many ideologies at the same time. So he said, yes, there has been a vacuum, but doesn't mean that no ideology exists. Fine. So that is something you should know. Richard Hofstadter. Hofstadter, another critic of end of ideology, argued that the fail to account for ongoing role of ideology in the society. As in, he said that if you see around you, a lot of decisions are visible which are not taken because of the technical reasonings. That means there has to be another reason, and that another reason has to be ideological. Fine. So that is something you should know. Herbert Marcuse and Raymond Aron. Marcuse is a critique of end of ideology, arguing that it is still ideological construct that serve to reinforce the status quo. So that's Marcuse's observation. And Raymond Aron was a French philosopher who argued that the idea of the end of ideology was a misreading of history. Okay. Now, it is but natural that one cannot expect every student to remember all these people and all these names for the single and sole reason of one very concept of end of ideology. But what you need to understand that when we talk, people like Herbert Marcuse, C. Wright Mill, Irvin Kristol, okay, and Raymond Aron, they have been again and again repeated over the period regarding various different concepts. And that's how you make sure that lesser number of scholars have to be read and more conceptual clarity can be brought in. So that is something we just discussed. Now, this is not only enough, you also need to understand here that since we are talking about, we also need to discuss about those places and those scholars and the resurgence of ideology. Now, this is something even more interesting. A lot of scholars from 1970s, late 1970s itself started saying, no, ideology's importance has regained or reasserted itself. Okay. So that is again important. Here you will see end of ideology debate. The idea of end of ideology has suggested that political ideology was becoming less relevant post Second World War. But by 1970 we saw the world was in extreme crisis of Cold War. The whole importance of Cold War started in 1960 itself, whether it was Cuban Missile Crisis or prior to it in 1961 the Berlin Wall issue and all that. But by 1970 it was all over there. Both the countries, United States and Soviet Union, were always ready to attack each other with nuclear arsenal. And all this was happening based on two very vivid ideologies, whether the Western world's capitalist liberal model or the Soviet model of communism. So the importance of ideology was very directly visible. After 1990s, again you will see that importance of ideology existed. Even in the right now the times, if you will see that ideological differences exist on all the parameters. Ideological differences are there on the sociological level, on the cultural level. Okay. After 1990s, people thought that okay, when communism is no more because of disintegration of Soviet Union, then by 1996-97 we started saying the division on the cultural line. The very attack of World Trade Center has been seen in that way. Okay. So resurgence have also taken place. Now, for the resurgence, the important event also you need to understand that whether it is the end of Cold War, the very reason of globalization. So in globalization, the space of ideology transformed totally. So that is also needed to be understood. Economic inequality. Now economic inequality has brought the society back to the same question. What is that question? The very question of communism and liberalism. Fine. Because economic inequality means people and society will again be divided on the binary lines between haves and have-nots, and that will become a very legitimate foundational issue which existed back in 1940 also, when everyone accepted that ideology played a very important role, and that question is again raised every now and then in almost every country. Almost every developing country is moving more and more towards an unequal society. That itself is the outcome of following the capitalist model of governance and capitalist model of economy also. So up to what extent you can blame them, it's a different issue, we can discuss them later on. But over here you need to understand that that is a legitimate issue, and that makes sure that the question of resurgence or existence of ideology comes back. Similarly, issues like environmental concern and technological change, they also bring new ideological issues. Environmental concerns brings on the table the sustainability question, and the sustainability question also brings in new ideologies. Okay, then the technology question, it is not only we are talking about the technological advancement as back Daniel Bell was talking in 1960s, but the technological advancement in past 2 decades are phenomenal. The very coming in of AI technology in day-to-day activities of people is going to transform the society in such a manner that there will be ideological changes also. Okay, so they have to be catered, and accordingly new set of guidelines have to be prepared. So if someone is saying that end of ideology debate is totally right, that is a wrong observation. Someone is saying that the very presence of ideology is always existent, that is also not correct enough. There is somewhere in between, there is something going on, and that is a struggle between both the ideas, and that is something you need to understand. When you are reading this in the handout, you will be going through a list of scholars again, that these are the modern scholars. Okay, I always call them that when you are reading something like a philosophy or sociology or political science, you will get a list of scholars who are alive, and that's very important. Okay, because most of the time by the specific point you get to read about the scholar and his ideas, usually the scholars are dead. Okay, so if some scholar is well known, is appreciated while he is alive, it is something to be celebrated. Now over here you will see whether it is Ernest Laclau, Slavoj Žižek, Francis Fukuyama, David Harvey, Raymond Plant, Diego Fossati. Diego Fossati is an Indonesian scholar who has just shown the fault lines in the Indonesian society because of which ideology is very much active. Similarly, Francis Fukuyama, the seminal famous Francis Fukuyama, who gave the famous end of history argument back in 1989 and subsequently published a book, End of History, in 1991. You'll see somewhere around after 2008-2009 the society transformed in such a manner that he himself started saying that end of history is not true, and by 2018 he said no, with the rise of China the situation has totally transformed and end of history is not a standardized statement. Post COVID he properly started writing articles, and his latest book also talks about that his observation back in 1989 and 1991 were not true. While talking about end of history, he mentioned about the Hegelian struggle, okay, between the idea of historical sense. And while talking about that, he also mentioned that end of ideology debate. In that very debate, we thought that the very concept of no need of ideology has won, but that is not true. Ideology is very much essential as it is observed in the society in 21st century. We have seen, if you will look at the working of the Chinese government, you cannot explain everything the Chinese government is doing just on the economic lines. If you start looking at the actions of Vladimir Putin in past 2 or 2.5 years, you cannot explain everything he is doing in Crimea, which will make economic sense. So if these things are not going to make economic sense, then they cannot be explained through the liberal capitalist model. And the very first assessment in the end of ideology debate is the acceptance of liberal capitalist model. And liberal capitalist model will not be able to explain all these working. So And not these are just two big examples, that's why I mentioned you the Chinese behavior and the Russian behavior, but you will also see the same kind of behavior in other countries also. Okay, for example, in America also, trying to build a wall on the southern borders will not make financial positive decisions in the long run. Immediately it might feel some jobs will be saved, but it won't be good for the American society in the long run. Letting in of the immigrants is the correct way forward, but there is an ideological idea that national boundaries or national borders have to be maintained, the sanctity and all those things on the conservative front. So ideology is again being very, very powerful. So resurgence of ideology is visible. Now, since this question comes a lot, so I thought why not just to explain this thing. Look, this question is so important. It comes in so similar formats. For example, in 2001, UPSC asked a direct question, define ideology, critically examine the end of ideology debate. In 2011, almost a decade later, they came back to the topic and asked, examine the debate on the end of ideology. And recently in 2019, they asked end of ideology debate, comment in 150 words. Fine. Either they will be asking you directly about end of ideology, or they will be asking you about the whole struggle, a whole discourse of whether ideology has ended or not ended or what is going on. And that is where you have to focus. The answer is also given in the handout. I won't be going to explain this thing again. We have just discussed this thing in detail. So that is actually ample amount of information to do it. Just on the ending note, let me tell you again. Even if you meet any leader on day-to-day basis, even now in India, and you just ask them in a normal language, sir, kya vichardhara hai? What's your belief set? And they will say that overall good of the people, isn't it? No one right now says that we are specifically, or what are our economic positioning, what is our cultural positioning. The one thing everyone can be brought on a consensus point is very simple, that overall good of the people is all what we want, and that is something you have to understand. Okay, so keep that thing in mind, that there are new concepts, but the underlying ideas are very important. You cannot remove them, and you cannot think that only by the technical advancement everything will happen. That will be all for this session. Let's catch up in next session and we'll discuss some other important topic on similar lines. Thank you.